What if the secret to slowing, and in some ways rolling back, the wear and tear we call aging, isn't a lab pill at all, but a plate set under the late Mediterranean sun? Instantly reverse aging is sensational, yes. It's also a useful provocation. Food won't rewrite your medical records overnight, nor will it replace treatments when those are needed. But centuries of Italian tables, plus modern labs and a few careful human studies, show that the right combinations of plants, fish, cheeses and oils change biology in measurable ways, sometimes quickly at the metabolic level and sometimes cumulatively across years. Stick with me. We'll honor the dramatic headline while staying honest about what the evidence actually demonstrates. Imagine a Sardinian village at dawn. The streets are steep and quiet. An old woman sweeps crumbs from a sun-warmed doorstep, humming. Her neighbor tends a narrow garden where arugula grows wild and bright as a coin. On market day, men and women from the hills unload sacks of beans, baskets of figs, and jars of early harvest olive oil so green it seems to glow. No one there calls it a longevity stack. They call it dinner. For generations, these plates have served as a kind of living lab. Every slow simmer, every tear of basil leaves, every grilled sardine is an experiment in nutrition passed down by taste and observation long before microscopes entered the picture. That old wisdom is now meeting modern methods. Teams at places like Harvard and other research centers have flagged specific molecules in these foods, polyphenols in olive oil that influence protein aggregation, omega-3s in small, oily fish that support membrane health, prebiotic fibers that feed the gut bacteria making short-chain fatty acids, molecules directly involved in pathways scientists link to aging. Oxidative stress, inflammation, microbiome balance, vascular health, and even protein homeostasis in the brain. Some of these findings rest on robust human cohorts. Others are early mechanistic results from animal or lab studies that point to promise rather than proof. We'll be explicit about the evidence for each food as we go. This is a countdown. 13 Italian foods that, when prepared and eaten in traditional ways, pack compounds, which I'll describe briefly, that act on the biology of aging. For each item, I'll give you a snapshot from the kitchen or market, the key compounds, a crisp one-line mechanism, a clear indication of the strength of evidence, and an immediate practical tip so you can add it to your week. If you like practical longevity advice rooted in culinary culture and lab data, hit like now. This week I'll keep bringing deep dives you can actually use. Let's start at 13. 13. Cannellini beans. White, plump and forgiving, simmered slowly until they fall apart on the spoon. In Italy, they're folded into soups, mashed with rosemary, or simply dressed with olive oil and lemon. Biologically, cannellini and other white beans are rich in resistant starch and fermentable fibers that feed butyrate-producing bacteria in the colon. Butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid tied to gut barrier integrity, reduced systemic inflammation, and epigenetic regulation of genes involved in aging. The bulk of the support here is mechanistic and observational. Animal studies and human microbiome research show consistent shifts in metabolic markers, though large-scale longevity trials are still lacking. Practical tip: make a pot of beans once or twice a week. Cool and refrigerate them to increase resistant starch, then lightly reheat and toss with garlic-scented olive oil or shredded greens for a daily side. And in 12. Basil. The perfume of fresh basil, sweet, peppery, a little clove-like, can transform a bowl of pasta into something celebratory. Beyond aroma, basil contains fenchel, which recent research links to activation of FFAR4 receptors in the gut-brain axis, and rosmarinic acid, a polyphenol with anti-inflammatory properties. These compounds appear to modulate signaling pathways tied to appetite regulation and neuroinflammation, potentially influencing metabolic health and cognitive resilience. Evidence here ranges from small human metabolic studies to promising animal models. The FFAR4 angle is early but intriguing. Practical tip: tear basil on top of finished dishes rather than cooking it to preserve volatile compounds. Add a generous handful to salads or late-stage sauces and let the oil carry those aromatics into your cells. 11. Red grapes. Think of the skin, taut and deeply colored, holding most of the story. Italians have been pairing grapes with cheese for centuries. Modern science points to oligomeric proanthocyanidins, OPCs, and resveratrol in grape skins that support collagen stability and vascular tone. Mechanistically, these polyphenols scavenge reactive oxygen species and may influence the enzymes that break down collagen, thereby supporting skin and connective tissue structure over time. The human evidence includes epidemiological correlations and small clinical trials, showing markers of vascular function and skin elasticity improving with grape polyphenols. Robust long-term trials are limited, but suggest favorable trends. Practical tip: enjoy a handful of fresh red grapes as a dessert or snack, and when possible choose grapes eaten with their skins. A small portion a few times a week adds flavonoids without a sugar overload. 10. Artichokes. The artichoke's layered leaves reveal a firm, tender heart at the center, rich, slightly nutty, and traditionally braised or grilled. The phytochemical cynarin supports bile flow and digestion, while its fiber, particularly inulin, behaves as a prebiotic, feeding beneficial microbes. Improved bile flow aids lipid digestion and phase 2 detoxification pathways, and the prebiotic effects tune the microbiome towards species that produce metabolites associated with reduced inflammation. Evidence includes mechanistic human studies on bile flow, small clinical trials demonstrating modest improvements in lipid profiles and digestive markers, and robust animal data for microbiome shifts. Practical tip: steam or roast artichoke hearts and dip them in a little lemon-scented olive oil, or use preserved artichoke hearts in salads to deliver the same compounds year-round. 9. Dried figs. In Italy, figs are a lunchtime luxury and a pantry staple, chewy, sweet, and full of tiny seeds. They are concentrated sources of minerals like magnesium and potassium, and they contain fermentable fibers that act as prebiotics. These fibers support bone mineral density indirectly by promoting gut bacteria that aid calcium absorption and by helping produce short-chain fatty acids. Evidence supporting figs' contribution to bone health and mineral balance is mostly observational and mechanistic, with some human nutritional studies showing improved mineral markers when figs are included as part of a balanced diet. Practical tip: substitute sweet snacks with 2 or 3 dried figs midday. Pair them with a small piece of cheese or a handful of nuts for a mineral-rich, satisfying bite that supports gut microbes. 8. Extra virgin olive oil, EVOO. A drizzle of early harvest EVO is like bottling the Italian sun, green, peppery, and full-bodied. EVO is rich in polyphenols, notably all-European aglycone and hydroxytyrosol, which have been linked in laboratory models to reduced oxidative stress, improved endothelial function, and even effects on protein aggregation processes implicated in neurodegeneration. Some mechanistic studies suggest components in EVOO may help disassemble harmful aggregates of misfolded proteins, an intriguing pathway for cognitive health. The strength of evidence is mixed. The broad cardiovascular and mortality benefits of Mediterranean-style diets, rich in EVO, are supported by substantial epidemiological studies and randomized trials showing improved cardiovascular risk markers. The specific anti-amyloid mechanisms are compelling in animal and cell models, but are earlier stage in humans. Practical tip: choose early harvest, cold-pressed EVO, and use it generously at the end of cooking or raw over salads. Because many polyphenols are sensitive to high heat, but are readily available when drizzled fresh. 7. Garlic And the sofrito foundation. You know the sound, the gentle hiss as chopped onions, carrots and celery, or garlic and onions depending on the region, hit hot oil. That sofrito is the aromatic backbone of so many Italian sauces. Garlic releases sulfur compounds, allicin and related molecules when crushed or chopped. These compounds have been linked to cardiovascular benefits, modest anti-cancer signals in epidemiological studies, and modulation of immune responses. Mechanistically, sulfur compounds can influence endothelial function and have antioxidant signaling effects. The human evidence includes population studies suggesting lower cardiovascular risk and experimental trials showing improvements in some biomarkers. The oncology signals are more observational and require caution. Practical tip: crush garlic and add it early to a gentle sofrito to develop flavor. If you use raw garlic for maximum allicin formation, let crushed garlic rest for a few minutes before cooking. Note the caveat: garlic can interact with blood-thinning medications. If you're on anticoagulants, consult your clinician. 6. Pistachios. Picture the small, sunlit orchards of Bronte and other Italian regions where pistachios develop a distinctive aroma. These nuts are rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, macular carotenoids, crucial for eye health, plus a spectrum of polyphenols. Mechanistically, these micronutrients protect the retina by filtering high-energy light and scavenging oxidative species, helping preserve macular function as we age. Evidence includes observational studies linking nut intake to better visual markers and small clinical trials showing improved serum carotenoid levels and some functional benefits to eye health. Practical tip: snack on a small handful of raw pistachios several times a week, or sprinkle chopped pistachios onto salads and roasted vegetables to add color, crunch, and carotenoids. 5. Arugula, that bright peppery leaf you toss on pizza or fold into a salad. It's high in dietary nitrates and glucosinolates, and it carries a notable amount of vitamin K. Dietary nitrates convert to nitric oxide, which supports blood vessel dilation and improves endothelial function, an important anti-aging cardiovascular pathway. Glucosinolates have been studied for their role in cellular detoxification pathways and possible cancer-preventive effects. Evidence for arugula's vascular benefits comes from human trials that measured improved blood flow and lowered blood pressure after nitrate-rich vegetable consumption. Glucosinolate-related findings are a mix of epidemiology and mechanistic work. Practical tip: add raw arugula to meals just before serving to preserve nitrates. Be mindful if you're taking warfarin or other vitamin K-sensitive medications and check with your health provider. Pause for a moment. If you listen to the pattern emerging from these first 9 items, a few themes stand out. Several foods directly support vascular health: arugula, EVOO, garlic, by acting on nitric oxide pathways, reducing oxidative stress, or improving endothelial function. Others act on the gut and microbiome: beans, figs, artichokes, delivering fibers that feed bacteria, producing beneficial metabolites like butyrate. Nuts and grapes bring polyphenols that protect connective tissue and the retina. Basil and EVOO contribute volatile compounds and phenolics that alter signaling and protein chemistry. These are not isolated silver bullets. They are complementary targets across the major pathways that scientists associate with aging: oxidative damage, chronic inflammation, microbiome imbalance, and protein aggregation. There's also a recurring culinary truth: technique matters. Cooking tomatoes with olive oil increases lycopene bioavailability. Cooling and reheating beans increases resistant starch. Tearing basil at the end preserves volatile compounds. Early harvest EVOO conserves delicate polyphenols. In practical terms, that means the way you cook often changes how the food acts inside your body. It's not simply which ingredient you pick up at the market, it's how you treat it. We're about to climb further up the countdown into some of the most celebrated items on any Italian table. Ingredients that show up in markets, in grandmothers' kitchens, and increasingly in lab reports. Next, we'll move into small, oily fish, wild mushrooms, Parmigiano Reggiano, and the slow-cooked tomato sauces that have fed generations. Each of those has a story that ties a sensory memory to a molecular mechanism and an evidence-level tag that helps you decide whether to try it this week or to watch for future clinical confirmation. Before we continue, if one of the foods so far surprised you, maybe you never thought of figs as a mineral powerhouse, or you underestimated how much EVO's polyphenols do, you can pick one from today's list and try incorporating it into your next 3 meals. I'll share specific recipes in the next segment. Now, let's move up the list to 4 ingredients that show especially strong mechanistic promise, starting with a fish that has sustained coastal communities for centuries. Sardines, small, silver and sizzling over glowing coals. Sardines carry the scent of the sea and a history of coastal kitchens where nothing goes to waste. In Italian markets, they're often sold whole, heads and tails intact, or packed in olive oil with a sprig of rosemary. Simple preparations that honor their oily richness. The reason they matter for aging biology is straightforward. Sardines are concentrated sources of EPA and DHA, the long-chain omega-3 fats that incorporate into cell membranes, modulate inflammation, and support endothelial function and neuronal membrane fluidity. Those effects translate into measurable shifts in cardiovascular risk factors and markers of cognitive aging in human studies, and into preserved synaptic function in animal models. Evidence. Several well-designed human trials and large population studies support cardiovascular benefits of marine omega-3s. Cognitive and longevity outcomes are promising, but more heterogeneous. Practical tip: aim to add a small oily fish to your week. 2 to 3 servings of sardines or similar small fish, grilled, pan-roasted, or packed in high-quality EVO. If you buy canned, choose those packed in olive oil and drain lightly, or warm them gently with lemon, chili flakes, and parsley to carry both flavor and fat-soluble nutrients into your meal. What's striking with sardines is how their benefits are delivered intact and ready-made by tradition. Small fish that eat algae concentrate omega-3s, and coastal cooks have long paired them with bitter greens and citrus to balance richness and aid iron handling. For people concerned about mercury and other contaminants, small, oily fish are generally a safer choice than large predators. Their lower position on the food chain means fewer accumulated toxins, while still providing a dense dose of omega-3s. If you're vegan or allergic to fish, algae-based DHA supplements exist, but remember, whole sardines also give you heme iron, vitamin D, and easily accessible proteins that interact with those lipids in ways supplements alone may not replicate. Mini hook before the next item. From a fish that builds membranes to a fungus that protects them. Next, wild mushrooms and an antioxidant with a surprising reputation. 3. Wild mushrooms. Imagine a forager returning from a morning trek in the hills of Tuscany, basket heavy with chanterelles and porcini, the air damp with pine and soil. Wild mushrooms offer an earthy, umami counterpoint in Italian stews and risottos, and their biological story is twofold. They deliver beta-glucans, which modulate innate immunity and improve microbial signaling, and they are one of the richest dietary sources of ergothioneine, a sulfur-containing antioxidant that cells use selectively. Beta-glucans interact with immune receptors to tune inflammatory responses, while ergothioneine accumulates in tissues and protects mitochondria and DNA from oxidative insults, mechanisms directly relevant to cellular aging and resilience. Evidence. A mix of epidemiological studies linking higher mushroom intake to lower all-cause mortality and cancer risk, plus robust mechanistic and animal model research on beta-glucans and ergothioneine. Human clinical trials are emerging, but remain limited. Practical tip: when possible, choose wild or foraged varieties or high-quality cultivated substitutes and cook them gently. Sauté in EVOO with garlic and a pinch of salt, because cooking breaks down chitin slightly and makes beta-glucans more bioaccessible. If using dried mushrooms, rehydrate them in warm water and reserve the soaking liquid for stock. Many soluble compounds leach into the water and flavor your cooking while carrying beneficial molecules. A few practical caveats: wild mushrooms should be sourced responsibly. Mistaking varieties is a real risk in foraging. Also, some people can react to mushrooms with digestive sensitivity. Start with modest portions. The larger nutritional point is that mushrooms deliver a package of immunomodulatory and antioxidant compounds that complement the fatty acid and polyphenol story elsewhere on this list. They reinforce cellular repair pathways and help the immune system maintain surveillance against dysregulated cells. Tiny transition. After the forest floor, we move to the aging-friendly artifact of a cheese cellar, Parmigiano Reggiano. Udun, Parmigiano Reggiano. The granular crunch of a well-aged Parmigiano Reggiano, broken into shards, its umami depth released with each bite, anchors many Italian tables. This cheese is not merely a flavor amplifier. It is a fermented matrix rich in bioactive peptides, calcium, and a dense profile of free amino acids formed during long maturation. Fermentation releases peptides that in some cases exhibit ACE inhibitory activity, mild blood pressure modulating effects, and increases mineral bioavailability that supports bone density. Additionally, small peptides and proline-rich fragments can act as antioxidant signaling molecules and may modulate immune responses. Evidence: small clinical trials and nutritional studies indicate modest blood pressure and mineral status improvements with aged cheeses in the context of balanced diets. Much of the mechanism work comes from biochemical and controlled human feeding studies rather than long-term randomized trials. Practical tip: use Parmigiano as a finishing ingredient. Shave over greens, soups, or steamed vegetables to add flavor, spark salivation, which aids digestion, and deliver concentrated peptides without needing large portions. Keep portion sizes moderate due to sodium. A little goes a long way. For those avoiding dairy, similar sensory satisfaction can be sought via fermented plant-based alternatives, though the exact peptide profile will differ. There's cultural wisdom here too. Italian cooks have long used Parmigiano's intensity to flavor dishes sparingly, which aligns with nutritional aims, maximizing nutrient density while limiting excessive salt and calories. For bone health, pairing Parmigiano with prebiotic-rich vegetables or beans within the same meal can support both mineral uptake and microbiome-driven signals that favor bone maintenance. Mini summary ahead of the finale. We've moved from cells to immune tone to bone-supporting fermentation. Now let's close with an ingredient that demonstrates the theatrical merger of kitchen technique and bioavailability. The tomato, slow-simmered and slicked with olive oil. Udine tomatoes, slow-cooked tomato sauce. Picture a heavy pot on the stove, tomatoes breaking down into a glossy red sauce that smells of caramelized sweetness and herb-scented steam, the essence of Italian home cooking. Tomatoes are the poster child for preparation-dependent bioavailability. Raw tomatoes contain lycopene, a carotenoid, and potent antioxidant. But when tomatoes are cooked and combined with fat, especially olive oil, the lycopene becomes dramatically more bioavailable and able to integrate into human tissues. Mechanistically, lycopene is a lipophilic antioxidant that scavenges reactive oxygen species and protects lipid membranes. Epidemiological and clinical studies link higher lycopene status to lower markers of oxidative stress, better cardiovascular profiles, and reduced risk of certain cancers. Because lycopene concentrates in skin and prostate tissues, cooked tomato preparations have been most widely studied in relation to skin aging and prostate health. Evidence. Controlled human feeding trials consistently show increased plasma and tissue lycopene after cooked tomato consumption, and epidemiological data suggest associations with lower disease risks. Mechanistic cellular and animal models support antioxidant and anti-inflammatory pathways. Practical tip: make a simple, slow-cooked tomato ragu. Use ripe plum tomatoes or canned San Marzano-style tomatoes. Simmer slowly with early-harvest evu and a few garlic cloves, smashed and briefly rested after chopping to form allicin, if you like raw notes, and finish with basil torn in at the end. Eat this sauce several times a week over whole grains or with beans to pair lycopene's antioxidant profile with fiber and other anti-inflammatory nutrients. It's important to highlight a nuance the headline teases. The instant part of reversal can be true in a narrow metabolic sense. Lycopene absorption increases quickly after a meal. Nitric oxide levels can rise within hours after nitrate-rich vegetables. And plasma omega-3 levels respond within weeks of dietary change. But systemic aging outcomes are cumulative. Cooking tomatoes with oil gives you a quick biochemical improvement in lycopene uptake. However, clinically meaningful shifts in cardiovascular events or measurable slowing of long-term aging processes still require sustained dietary patterns alongside other lifestyle measures. In short, some biochemical switches flip fast. The full orchestra of aging-related outcomes plays out over years. Synthesis: how these 13 foods act together and what to put on your plate this week. Step back from the sensory details and look at the map these items trace across the biology of aging. You'll see multiple complementary targets: vascular function, dietary nitrates, evo-polyphenols, omega-3s, oxidative stress and protein homeostasis, evo, tomatoes, grapes, mushrooms, microbiome and gut-derived signaling, beans, artichokes, figs, mushrooms, immune tone and detoxification, garlic, artichoke, wild greens, and structural integrity of tissue, pistachios for macular carotenoids, parmigianos, minerals and peptides. The key insight is synergy. Culinary traditions often pair ingredients in ways that increase nutrient availability and create beneficial biochemical interactions. Tomato and olive oil, beans cooled for resistant starch, basil added at the end to preserve volatiles, sofrito to build bioactive sulfur profiles before long simmering. When these foods are eaten as part of a varied, predominantly plant-forward Mediterranean-style pattern, population studies and randomized trials converge on a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, improved metabolic markers, and signals consistent with slower functional decline. A practical weekly blueprint. How to apply this without becoming a gourmet archaeologist. Start by choosing 3 or 4 of these foods and rotating them through your meals. For example, pick sardines twice this week, grilled or warmed in evu. Make a slow tomato ragu that yields 2 to 3 dinners. Cook a pot of cannellini beans and cool them for salads, and add raw arugula or basil as finishing notes across multiple plates. Drop a handful of pistachios into breakfasts or salads 3 times a week, and use Parmigiano sparingly to deepen flavor. Once a week, include sautéed wild mushrooms or an artichoke salad. These small, repeatable shifts accumulate, improving nutrient status, shaping your microbiome, and tuning inflammatory and vascular pathways over time. Evidence literacy note: the degree to which any single food affects long-term aging depends on study design. Some claims rest on well-replicated human trials and cohort data, EVOO's cardiovascular benefits, marine omega-3s for triglyceride lowering. Others are supported by small clinical studies and observational data, pistachios, Parmigiano's peptides, and several rely primarily on mechanistic and animal studies that are biologically plausible and promising, but need more human trials. Ergothioneine from mushrooms, specific anti-amyloid effects. Wherever the evidence is earlier, treat the food as a hopeful complement rather than a guaranteed therapy. Safety and contraindications briefly. Garlic-rich preparations can potentiate blood-thinning effects and should be discussed with clinicians if you're taking anticoagulants. Vitamin K-rich greens, arugula, and other leafy vegetables can interact with warfarin dosing. These greens are not off-limits, but they require consistency and medical guidance if you're on vitamin K-sensitive therapy. For those with specific allergies, fish, dairy, nuts, substitutes exist that capture similar mechanisms, e.g., algae-derived omega-3s for fish, fortified plant cheeses for calcium, but whole food complexity is hard to replicate perfectly. Also, be cautious with high-dose, unregulated supplements. Many compounds are safest and most effective in food matrices, and mega-dosing minerals or antioxidants without medical oversight is not advised. A final culinary science thought: technique is policy. The same tomato can be nutritionally different depending on how you treat it. The same beans can be more or less microbiome friendly based on cooling and reheating. Tradition encoded practical rules. Tear basil, cook tomatoes slowly, harvest olives early, because those techniques change taste and, incidentally, chemistry. When you adopt these foods, pay attention to preparation. It's the bridge between flavor and function. Pick one action this week. Try the slow-cooked tomato ragu with early harvest evo and a handful of torn basil, or add a can of high-quality sardines to a salad twice. Place a small bowl of pistachios by your workstation. Steam an artichoke for dinner, or cook a pot of cannellini beans to chill and toss through salads. Tell us which you tried in the comments. Pick just one, keep it simple, and let that single habit anchor more change. If this exploration felt useful, subscribe for deeper dives into how specific recipes alter nutrient bioavailability, and for practical meal plans that weave these foods into a week of cooking. Food won't rewrite your medical chart overnight, but when culinary tradition and modern science converge, simple plates can produce measurable shifts in biology. Eat well, cook mindfully, and let the table be your laboratory, one delicious experiment at a time.